My Hero Academia has had a lot of hints recently that there's at least something else going on in the background of the story with all of the focus on America. So we're going to talk about that right now after that intro. Hit it! It starts with All For One's jail riots and the news of his release spreading across the world. All For One has friends in many places, and after getting out of prison, he stretched his hands across the globe and activated his global network of villains and allies in the dark to begin rampaging all over the globe in an attempt to cause chaos everywhere so that nobody can come to Japan's aid. This largely succeeds because in My Hero Academia chapter 328, we can see world leaders from all over debating about whether or not they're able to send heroes to Japan. And ultimately they decide to let Japan handle All For One and Shigaraki on their own because they can't afford to let their own heroes leave the country and upset the delicate equilibrium between heroes and villains taking place in all of these different lands. With these world leaders all discussing things like All For One, All Might, and even showing that their biggest heroes all seem to have a friendship with All Might to the point where some very desperately feel as if they need to come save him and his country, this really opened up the world of My Hero Academia and Japan's problems specifically to a whole new arena. And with the world leaders being silhouetted, you wouldn't be wrong to at least assume that eventually you might get to see what those presidents and prime ministers look like behind the shadows. But the one that we're interested in is the American leader, a man in the shadows often seen with sweat coming from his face. It's very interesting introducing the American president so late in the story, but I do think that Horikoshi is going somewhere with this. The first time that we see him is during Star and Stripes' introduction in the series, where he tells the rest of the world leaders that he understands everything that they're saying, but sadly one of his heroes, the number one hero in all of the states in fact, has already left for Japan on her own to handle All For One for her old master All Might. Now Star and Stripes does head over to America and tries to reach All Might, but does get stopped in the middle of the air and has a massive battle with Shigaraki that we might even see at the end of My Hero Academia Season 6. But it's a really back and forth battle between Shigaraki and the person called the strongest woman in the world, and her quirk is just absolutely busted, but I don't want to go too in depth on the fight and go over the whole thing because that would just waste a lot of time in this video, and honestly we could just do a separate video going over that. Ultimately, Star makes the call to summon the strongest missiles America has to end Shigaraki, and we start to get a decent bit of backstory on America's number one hero. But to call over the intercontinental missiles, she needs to call upon General Agbar, another character we begin to follow in America tied to Star's character. As the series progresses and we get into the final arc, we randomly cut away from the final battles going on to get a view of the White House and the situation that America is facing thanks to All For One, where outside of the White House, we see a dismal situation, with someone being taken out right outside the gates as it looks like the country has fallen to anarchy and criminals have begun worshipping All For One. Inside, we see Agbar talking to the U.S. president about Star and Stripes' sacrifice, and ultimately Agbar takes some of the blame for even allowing her and the jet fighters to leave, but the conversation turns to something much darker. Originally, we saw that All For One was able to keep these other countries at bay, but the organized crime groups partnered with him now have caused such a ruckus in these countries that an unspoken understanding is starting to form between them all. With the death of Star and Stripes and no All Might, the world really thinks that there's no hope against All For One, so they all seemingly, even America, have begun to lay their plans for bowing to All For One's power and trying to gain favor with him for the new world to come. Agbar pushes back on this and tells the president that he's wrong and that they can't let that thing win in this exact moment because this is their only chance to put a stop to him while the fight is still raging on. If All For One gains control and their children have to grow up in a world with him as their leader, what sort of fate is that to suffer when the ones responsible for fighting back just gave up and threw in the towel? So this is another example of us focusing on the US randomly here, but it can't be for nothing, I'd imagine. There has to be some sort of payoff moving forward, or these scenes would really just be for nothing but world building. But just when I thought that maybe there actually was nothing to this, Hori did it again. This time, most recently in My Hero Academia chapter 374, where after focusing on a mutant uprising and Spinner's goal of releasing Kurogiri onto the battlefield, we start a new chapter and randomly cut away to America once again, where a beautiful weather girl that looks like Quirkless Mirko honestly, explains that a large flammagenitus cloud has suddenly formed over Japan and continues to grow at an alarming rate. She continues to warn the audience that if this massive cloud were to enter the jet stream, it could potentially influence weather farther in North America. Now, flammagenitus clouds are massive clouds usually formed after volcano eruptions or forest fires that can even produce lightning and firestorms, which are basically fire tornadoes thanks to all the turbulence and heat often found within these clouds. So that's to say that these clouds come with massive wind forces and dangerous weather potentially, depending on what happens to them in the jet stream after they're formed. In this instance, we're told that the cloud actually combined with a naturally occurring tropical storm off the southwest coast of Japan, and now the giant cloud could likely act as an engine for the storm if it did end up keeping that track and traveling up the jet stream through the US. This is to say that all the things going on in Japan are having potential consequences for things outside of Japan, and despite the world's view that they should leave the situation alone for their own good, if, like we're seeing, the battle in Japan starts to cause negative effects for the rest of the world, I truly wonder if no one would step in even for the sake of their own country. The Weather Girl says that a single person's power can change the world, and questions if the birth of the glowing baby really doomed humanity to a world of chaos with the birth of quirks, or if there's really anyone still out there that can take down All for One, which is something that she says it doesn't seem like the world governments and the news agencies even want anymore, given the nature of the situation. So what's the deal, right? Like, why are we suddenly getting this much more of a global view of the world, and why is it that more times than not, that focus is on the U.S.A. specifically? My Hero Academia's author Kohei Horikoshi has such a great world with My Hero Academia and tons of amazing characters that have yet to still be properly explored, so can we truly believe he means to end the series with our students still only in their second year of school, or is there something beyond that? For a second part of My Hero Academia, we'd likely need a new setting with the world getting involved, because Japan might feel pretty small for the story to stay contained there after all these giant world-altering quirk battles. I'd love to see our heroes split up across the globe to different countries to finish their studies, or maybe to even take what Japan has learned from defeating All for One and Shigaraki, and the entire fiasco in general, to other countries so that maybe they can learn how to keep those situations from ever happening again, or better deal with situations already going on in those areas. Already in this final section of the story, Horikoshi has set up a few conflicts for us to explore in a potential continuation for the series, and many of these things could actually take our characters quite a lot longer to deal with than the last year they've been put through at UA. First, there's those organizations and friends that All for One has all over the globe. We know that groups like Jisaki's and the Metal Liberation Army are scattered all over the world, so I think seeing those groups dismantled along with whatever surely interesting roster of quirk users and villains with their own reasons for what they're doing would be rather interesting to explore. Second, there's the issue of America's #1 hero being killed, and who will ultimately take up that #1 spot. I think the idea of another My Hero Academia story starting with the news that America's #1 hero has been killed could be a really nice setup for a story, and All for One called America the home of the heroes, which tells me that there's a wide variety of quirks and heroes there that we could really grow attached to if we got to see a day in their life. Lastly, there are a number of plot threads that still haven't been tied up, like Deku's dad and his overseas job, that could easily come into play in a sequel series, but mainly the possibility of seeing Deku in All Might's playground in the States, where his master learned to become the most iconic hero on Earth, really excites me. And I think the number of characters who knew All Might or would want to interact with Deku, or do the complete opposite honestly, trying to stay away from him, would actually be high and would allow for all sorts of intrigue as Deku realizes that All Might's job extended far beyond the borders of Japan, and being the greatest hero means having to deal with Shigaraki-style threats more often than just in your freshman year of high school. So despite the fact that it seems like Horikoshi surely wants to be done with the series, is there room for any sort of continuation, even if he was only supervising it? And that's where I throw it to you guys. Do you want to see a My Hero Academia Part 2? We've seen other authors say that they're ending their series or they're taking a break only to later return with a new work years later that continues the story. Does the story of My Hero Academia feel like it's actually ending to you? And what do you think is up with the focus on the U.S.A. in these last couple arcs of the story? Let me know everything in the comment section below. For all things MHA, this is Pineapple once again, and I love you guys. See you later. Peace.